Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Chris Burak had written me and mentioned, I don't know if he listened to all of them, but a whole bunch of the podcasts. And he had some questions that he didn't think had been fully addressed. He said he's just a regular collector. And I said, that's all the better. Let's do an episode together where I can address your questions in your presence. I don't like to answer questions one-off, just responding to him, but I thought, well, I'll just get him to come on. Other people can listen in on our discussion. So it wound up being a nice conversation. Thank you, Chris, for your passion about the hobby and how you were very passionate, and then you left and then you came back. So we hear a little bit of his story. So thanks, sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggins and Scott Auctions, Topps, Panini, and Upper Deck. So keep your questions coming. It's fun to answer questions that are expressed in a different way. Even somebody that's listened to a whole bunch of episodes says, I haven't heard your answer to this, and I'm curious, and I think other people are too. So again, thanks, Chris. Here it is. When you sent me your email, you ended up with keep having people ask you tough questions. And I realized sometimes I'm telling what I think happened, but if people ask it in a certain way, it jogs my memory. You had a couple of questions. One was about the subscription copies, and the other was soccer compared to golf. But you may have some other questions too. Also, you mentioned your frustration with the junk wax here, and I wanted to delve into that a little bit too.
Yeah, we can start with those. I was born in 1973. It rings true to me. So in the mid 80s, you're a kid going to the mailbox, see that Beckett, and you get so excited. And then there's this huge crease right down the middle. I didn't know what to do as a kid in the 80s. Sometimes you just accept it and then you open up and you get the great content. But all those great pictures, my Roberto Clemente cover or whatever, has a big crease in the middle.
Okay, so who do you think is to blame?
That's a tough one because I know you had switched over to a different type of material for the cover, easier to bend. I don't know if it was possible to mail it out with a do not bend label on it. Or is it the mail people?
Let me respond because you are correct. We had a thicker cover in the first year or two. We actually had our covers done in a different place so we could get special printing and special treatments of the covers. And then they were brought together with the inside of the magazine and put together saddle stitch and all that. So the cover was different. And over time, it did get thinner, which made it easier to roll or fold. And I'm hoping they didn't fold. What we found, Chris, is that even if we put on there, do not fold, the Postal Service, the carriers, they have a tough job, and they're trying to stuff the mail into either a tube or a slot or something. It wasn't us. When we did our subscription copies and dealer copies, we were very careful. We polybagged in many of the years as well. And that was so we wouldn't have to put the label on the magazine itself. So we really wanted the magazines to be collector's items. So if it came folded, we didn't fold it, and we did not encourage folding. And if we had reports, we would talk to the Postal Service, but it got down to the individual carrier because they were putting it in their backpack and then they put it in your mail slot and all that stuff. I apologize if you lived in the country or in the RFDs, or you lived in an apartment complex that had these little postal slots, because the magazine was pretty close to 8.5 by 11, and that's not a standard envelope size. So I feel terrible about it. Frankly, you know what happened for most of the people? It's the reason why we wound up selling a lot more copies through the hobby shops, through the dealers, because you had a better chance of getting a pristine copy. And not only that, you didn't get it later. They both arrived about the same time. So if you were getting folded copies, my apologies. We tried to educate the Postal Service. They really cared about us in one sense because we were a really big customer because we mailed out a lot of stuff. And we had each magazine going out every Monday or whatever it was. And so we were a repetitive, good customer for the Postal Service. But once it got distributed to the carrier routes, it was pretty hard to discipline the postal carrier for folding it. You can say, hey, this is a collector's item. People are going to want to keep this. If I say the workaround was people said, I'm just going to copy it. Were you close to a hobby shop?
2 hobby shops. I was in Reading, Pennsylvania at the time.
Okay. One of my questions for you was about, you got frustrated about the junk wax era. I was wondering, are you talking about in the 80s when you were younger? Or in the early 90s when all that culminated in 94 when there was a baseball strike? You were a young man by then, but what was the frustration for you? Were you just seeing that the cards in the mid 80s, except for a few exceptions, we're just overproduced.
Dr. Beckett, I had every opportunity to buy 1986 Fleer Michael Jordans just like everyone else, or 1987. It's just what I chose to buy. But in the early 90s that I stopped buying baseball cards just because I didn't understand what was going on. A lot of overproduction. If the hobby truly is interested in becoming 10X, as you're talking about, I am curious as to how many people were in the industry. Did you say you sold a million magazines at the peak? How many collectors are there now? Did other people become disillusioned with the hobby and just stop buying? Whose responsibility was that?
Again, I don't know if you're asking me to fall on my sword. I don't think it was my fault, but I do think that anybody in the industry in those days was trying to be responsible. And you bring up 86, 87 Fleer basketball. Chris, that was junk wax when it arrived. Junk wax for a couple more years. It really didn't hit its stride until shortly before we did our basketball magazine. But for a couple of years, the Fleer basketball products were DOA. They were considered junk wax. They were unsaleable, even at quarter a pack or something like that. And so I don't know if that's what you mean by the frustration. So here's the parallel to now is that cards were becoming available everywhere. And you could do the math and say, if the cards are available everywhere, they can't be worth that much. And then when you go to sell them, you were having trouble. And that was before grading really kicked in. You got a brick of 100 rookie cards and it just became a commodity. So I'm hoping that nowadays we're not repeating that history of making cards so everywhere that people say they can't be worth very much because they're everywhere. On the other hand, the chase cards, the case hits, they're not everywhere. But the reason the junk wax thing got going is because the commons became trash almost. And I don't like that. And so nowadays, you bust open a box, unless it's a very premium high-end box, if you bust a base set, a flagship set, and you get some base cards, not parallel or insert or anything, or any game used or autograph, they get left behind. And to me, that's unhealthy. So I don't want to grow the hobby at the expense of everybody looking for only the best cards, because I think that was part of what happened with the junk wax era.
No, Dr. Beckett, definitely. I don't need you to fall on a sword. I do understand it's buyer beware. I do understand you are reporting what was out there. That was your model. And I do appreciate everything that you've done for the industry. When 1990 Donruss came out, my godfather would go to the store and he would send me something in the mail, some 1990. And I would understand. I knew there were a lot of 1990 Donruss out there, but just like Rich Klein said, when someone was passing him cards, what do you say? He says, thank you. And same thing with me. I would write my godfather letter, thank you. What did my godfather do after I sent him the letter for thank you? He would buy me 10 more. So now I have what 2 monster boxes of 1990 Donruss sitting at my house.
Okay, just don't open them. They're coming back. But we're trying to get into what was going on behind the scenes. I think myself, as well as our team, we were really trying to preach restraint with the card companies. Is that you shouldn't just print all day, all night, just because you can, because sooner or later, you're commoditizing it in a way that people say nothing became scarce. Even 89 Upper Deck, which started out really promising, it was perceived as being expensive and all that. They ran the presses a lot on that. And if it hadn't been for Ken Griffey Jr., that would have been overproduced as well. Yet there was one card in there that gave it a chase element.
Yeah, the other question I talked about, Dr. Beckett, was the soccer cards. I really got into soccer as a kid, but never did I see a soccer price guide come out. I was really excited for all the issues of football and basketball when they came out, and even got excited when golf came out. But why is it that soccer never came out? Was it something that just wasn't popular?
Let me answer that in a more complicated way. Number one, for me, because a lot of it was centric on me, certainly in the mid-90s, soccer, Chris, probably was my 7th best sport. I'd played intramural soccer. My kids played soccer. So I had some awareness, but it ranked probably baseball, basketball, football, hockey, NASCAR, and golf all came ahead of soccer. Note the other 6 we wound up doing magazines for. We reluctantly got into golf because golf was not ripe. It was being pushed by Upper Deck because they had locked in Tiger, and that made a lot of sense for them. But the reason we did magazines was not because a bunch of 10-year-old boys or 12-year-old boys or 32-year-old boys wrote in and said, hey, we need a magazine for this. Our primary listening post was with the LCSs. the card shops. When the card shops said, you know what, you need to do a football card price guide because we're selling a lot more football cards. And if you did a football card price guide, we could sell that magazine in our store. And yes, we got subscriptions too. Same thing with basketball. Said, hey, basketball, it's time to do a basketball magazine. Hockey, same thing. NASCAR, same thing. Then there's a break there. Golf, the LCSs, the local card shops were not saying, hey, we're going to be selling, because it hadn't happened yet. Upper Deck was getting ready to deliver their landmark product with all this good Tiger stuff in it, and they overproduced it, but they were coming out with that. So Upper Deck asked us to do a magazine. We came back and said no, because the adage of if you build it, they will come is not what we go by. If they come, we will build it. In other words, we did not have people knocking on our door saying, you got to do golf. We had one big person knocking on our door. His name was Richard McWilliam, the CEO and owner of Upper Deck. And he's passed away now, but he made a personal plea to me. And I said, Richard, it's just not there right now. We will monitor it. If it catches fire, we will jump in. He said, it won't catch fire. And this is part of what you were getting. It won't catch fire unless you jump out there. So we're not going to jump out there naked. I said, the demand is not there. And he said, what would it take? So we worked out an agreement. It was our magazine, but they agreed to, hey, give us a strong level of advertising support, which they were the only producer of golf carts. So they said, we'll take out these ads, and such that we were probably pretty sure we couldn't really lose very much money because of their ad support. We might not make very much money. And then Richard, again, not just for your benefit, Chris, but for anybody's listening, Richard was an accountant. Through and through. He was very savvy. All of a sudden, he started doing the math, and he went, wait a minute, we give you this ad support and this thing really hits, then we want a percentage of your profits. I said, Richard, that's fine. Let's do that. And by the way, we want a percentage of your profits too. He said, wait a minute. So we said, why don't we just each keep our own profits? But if this thing really hit, and we hope it does, we're going to do a great job on this. We're going to tell it like it is with the price guide. But we're going to give some strong editorial, good photography and all that stuff. It's going to be a great looking magazine, and we'll see. And after 6 issues or whatever we contracted with, if it's really hitting on all cylinders, then we'll do a new deal. We'll either stop or keep going. We're going to do what we say. You're going to do what you say. And I hope we both prosper. And we shook on it. So he was not hard to deal with. He just really needed to see where the line in the sand was, as a good accountant would. They did pretty good with golf for a while. But my point, Chris, is they were ahead of the groundswell. They were trying to create interest and galvanize interest when we were right there. That's where soccer was. Now, soccer may be farther along now because we're another 20 plus years past that. But soccer has never caught on as much, just like golf has never caught on as much. Same thing. If people love golf, they play golf. If people love soccer, they either played soccer or their kids play soccer or they watch soccer. You can watch lots of soccer on TV. All these great leagues you can watch. So collecting is secondary to the enjoyment of the sport. So by the time I was retired, soccer wasn't ready. Nowadays, I think you could do a soccer price guide, but people don't really look at print price guides anymore. They're doing comps on the better cards. But for somebody to do a price guide, and it won't be me because I'm retired, but to really try to put together the structure of which are the players that sell for more, because I just think unless you could make a market and assess the market with not just the autograph and game used cards and the low serial number cards, but just the base cards, which base cards are better than others, and what are the true rookies, which is very tricky in soccer. So I'm with you. I'd like for somebody to do soccer as a price guide or as a monthly magazine that really focused on the collectibles, but it's a lot of work, and it's not my assignment anymore, Chris.
The man in the